the things that occurred to me. Number one, God's plan begins with God. He said, well, that's obvious. I mean, really. God's plan begins with God. Verse 18. The Lord said. Could it be that the reason for so much of the marital challenge these days is not first and foundationally a relational challenge, but could it be that the real root of the problem is a theological challenge? We're not getting our theology right. God said this is how it's to be. God's people know that God has a plan. God's plan is clear, but that doesn't mean it's easy. We have a clear plan, and the plan comes from the Lord who said. Number two, God's plan seeks the best for his creation, especially those created in his image. Verse 18, it's not good for the man to be alone. I'll give him a helper that's suitable, that's right, that's the right fit for him. C.S. Lewis says that no one is truly independent in this world, that we are all of us, hopelessly interdependent, if you will. Now, that's especially true when it comes to marriage. Every couple knows that they need the other. Number three, God's plan involves both a leaving and a cleaving, or a leaving and a joining. Verse 24, we're told that a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife. Now, in the agrarian culture of the Old Testament and the New, what we know is that the man would typically stay at home until he was married and established his own home. We enjoyed watching the Nativity Story twice over Christmas, and wonderful movie. And there's a scene in that film where Joseph has been betrothed to Mary, and he is building a house for his bride to be. And someone walks by as he's doing that and says, "Oh, Joseph, you're building a strong house." Indeed, a strong house is what Joseph was building. He was leaving father and mother to cleave, to be joined to his wife. Now, this is a fundamental principle that, unfortunately, some parents goof up because they insist on some kind of continuing control over their kids. The reality is that you are to rear your kids to make choices, and they live with those choices and the consequences, good and bad, and so do you. Our kids have made the choice to serve overseas for a time. And yesterday at DIA, when we were praying with them just before they went through the security lines there, it was like, wow, I mean, the allergies hitting you, like, oh man. Leaving is one thing, but Cambodia is another. I mean, but Kristen is doing what she should be doing. She is not to be following our personal wishes and desires, but to join with her husband and to make their own way, to follow their own path, what God is leading them to do. That's what every couple is supposed to do. They form their own family unit. Number four, God's plan involves sexual intimacy and more. Verses 24-25, the two become joined as one. Now, in God's ideal plan for husband and wife, that goes beyond a terrific friendship. And it even goes beyond the physical delights of marriage. It actually moves to an even deeper level than that. It's not just the joining of bodies, it's the joining of hearts and minds. And so the goal is really oneness, and there's a level of transparency that doesn't come easily because we're in a broken world, and we're all fig leaf people, if you will. We're all hiding from God and hiding from each other, and this is something every couple has to grow to understand. Now, this call of God to a couple, he declares the couple to be one, but they need to work on that oneness, is something that, this challenge is something that never ends. The husband and wife relationship is clearly the closest of all relationships that we have reference to in the Scriptures. The scholars are all in agreement that the divine pattern for marriage is a pattern that God has established, and that God established this at creation. God's plan is clear. It's not easy, but it's clear. And it's radically different from the culture's plan. Our culture says that, well, marriage is really optional. And you can just try it before you buy it. You don't have to make a commitment to just see how things will work out. Well, how's that working out? Right now, over half of all couples who do marry admit to not only having slept together prior, but to living together prior. And all that does is complicate the future marriage if, in fact, they end up getting married at all. This pattern of our culture, which is increasingly common, is becoming a source of increasing complications and challenges. In addition, because the divorce rate among heterosexuals is so high, the expectations for marriage are so low, that heterosexuals are now hesitant because we feel like we've lost our voice to say anything to those who reject the ideal plan of God. And certainly we feel like in some ways we've lost our voice to speak to those who are homosexually inclined. Now, the homosexual issue, as you know, is an increasingly sensitive one. I would just make this observation to begin with, and that is, according to the Bible, there is no possible way to justify sexual activity outside of marriage, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual. You cannot justify that according to the Scriptures and say that God is okay with that. Now, you say, well, that was then, but this is now. In fact, Alan, you are referencing Old Testament stuff, and that's old, out of date. What these tell us, what Jesus, we're okay with Jesus. Let's hear about Jesus. What does Jesus say? Okay, well, let's find out. Let's go from the first book of the Old Testament to the first book of the New Testament, the book of Matthew. Please turn your Bibles to the book of Matthew, chapter 19. Now, this text is very, very clarifying. Verses 4 through 6. Matthew 19. Jesus is being challenged by the Pharisees. Haven't you read the Scriptures? Jesus replied. They record that from the beginning, God made them male and female. And he said, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they're no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. Now, clearly, they can't be split apart. And what Jesus is saying is, don't let that happen. Which, by the way, also speaks to flirting with someone that you're not married to. Be careful about that. You flirt with another married person, you could actually be interrupting the ideal plan of God. You could be working against God's plan for marriage. Now, those of you who are into going a little deeper, one of the ways to do it, very simple, is to get a study Bible. For example, we have the Life Application Study Bibles, great deal. We'll run out. We'll get more next week. Super duper deal, by the way. $28 for one of these. It's like cost, okay? And a low cost at that. Here's a little insight that I found at the bottom of the page, referencing this text, explaining it further, making application of it really from Matthew 19. Today, many homosexuals want to commit to marry with the blessing of the church. Reasons for homosexual feelings and desires are complex and serious. Christians should not trivialize the situation or flippantly condemn the homosexual person. But Jesus made God's ideal very plain. At creation, he approved one kind of marriage bond, man to woman. These become one flesh, one before God. Where does that leave homosexual marriage? At best, it is a human invention without any biblical precedent. God created man and woman. Heterosexual monogamy is God's plan for marriage. The best plan, the only one.